So the fifth chapter of your IGCSE EdExcel biology syllabus is known as biological molecules. अब ये biological molecules consist of four parts. We have carbohydrates, we have proteins, lipids. ठीक है, इसके अंदर आपको सारे वो हम लोग कार्बोहाइड्रेट्स के डिफरेंट टाइप डिस्कस करेंगे. शुगर, सिंपल शुगर्स, डाइसैकेराइड्स, पॉलीसैकेराइड्स. प्रोटीन्स के अंदर अमाइनो एसिड्स आ जाएंगे, उनकी डिटेल पढ़ेंगे. पॉलीपेप्टाइड, ठीक है, फंक्शंस ऑफ प्रोटीन वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. देन वी हैव लिपिड्स, फैट्स, ट्राइग्लिसराइड्स. भी हम other than that, water is also one of your biological molecules. Another important thing in this chapter would be your food tests. जो हम टेस्ट फॉर शुगर्स करते हैं, टेस्ट फॉर स्टार्च, टेस्ट फॉर प्रोटीन्स, टेस्ट फॉर फैट्स, लिपिड्स, वो सारा हम किस में करेंगे? इन चैप्टर नंबर 5 ऑफ EdExcel IGCSE syllabus, which is biological molecules. Now in biological molecules we have carbohydrates, proteins and lipids. Most of the molecules in the living organisms fall into three categories. वो हैं कौन कौन सी? Number 1 carbohydrates, number 2 we have proteins, and number 3 we have lipids. तो ये आपको तीन categories हैं of biological molecules. Now these all contain carbon and so are described as organic molecules. For example, carbohydrate consists of carbon, oxygen and hydrogen. Protein consists of carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, and an additional one, nitrogen as well, which is not present in carbohydrate, and also contains some small amounts of other elements such as sulfur. जब इसके अंदर sulfur होता है, we also call that bond as cysteine. Then we have lipids. Lipids contain carbon, oxygen, and hydrogen. Now, one of the common thing that you can notice over here that all these three, जो आपके सामने तीन biological molecules हैं, all of them contain carbon. All of them contain oxygen, and also hydrogen is present in all three of those as well. Only one difference is of nitrogen, which is present in proteins. Now, if we talk about the structure of carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, well, carbohydrates, you should know that basic unit of all carbohydrates are simple sugars. For example, a very common example of a sugar is glucose, which is a simple sugar, a monosaccharide. A monosaccharide का क्या मतलब होता है? Monosaccharide means which contain only a single carbon ring. Which contain only a single carbon ring. इनके पास सिर्फ एक ring होता है of carbon. Because when carbon bond together, they make these rings. अगर आप यहाँ पे देखें, if you can notice in this picture, we have these rings present. These rings, if these are a single ring, वो हम उसको कहते हैं simple sugar, a monosaccharide. When they have a double ring structure, we call them disaccharide. या जब दो glucose molecules combine करते हैं, we call them disaccharide. And when lots of those rings and glucose molecules join together, we call them disaccharide. So monosaccharide means two glucose molecules. For example, if two simple sugars join together, or if two monosaccharides join together, they would form a disaccharide made up of two glucose molecules. And if two or more, if more than two join together, they make up a polysaccharide. For example, अगर मैं बात करूं, I have an example of glucose. Now glucose itself is a monosaccharide. When it's going to combine with another glucose, it's going to make maltose, and maltose is a disaccharide. ये monosaccharide था, this is also monosaccharide. Both these monosaccharide simple sugars join together to form a disaccharide, which is maltose, and more of these glucose molecules, let's say more than two, join together to form glycogen or starch, which is a polysaccharide. So this is an example of starch. We have how many glucose molecules? One glucose molecule, second glucose molecule, and a third glucose molecule. When these three glucose molecules join together, they form starch molecule. इसी तरह I told you in the previous chapter that when we talk about starch and glycogen, these are very famous. Both of these are famous storage molecules. ये क्या है? They are both storage molecules. जैसे कि carbohydrates के अंदर हम जो बात करते हैं glycogen की. Now sugars are stored in the form of glycogen in animals, and sugars are stored in the form of starch when we talk about plants. Plants में starch is the storage molecule. In animals, glycogen is the storage molecule. Both starch and glycogen, both of these are polysaccharides, और ये glucose के ही macromolecules होते हैं. So in front of you, you can see this long chain structure of a molecule known as starch, a polysaccharide carbohydrate. Next, we have proteins. Now, proteins, we know it's the basic unit of all proteins is amino acids. Amino acids all join together to form protein. Now, in total, there are 20 different types of amino acids present. ठीक है, हमारे पास total 20 different amino acids present होते हैं, and 3 amino acids make one protein. We'll be doing this in the further chapter when we'll be talking about transcription and translation and the synthesis of proteins which takes place on ribosomes. Now we know that proteins are made up of amino acids and 20 different amino acids are present. Now each of these amino acids would form a different combination. For example, if I talk about 3 types of amino acids, आपके पास कोई भी हो गए, glutamic acid, valine, methionine. 3 of these combine to form one protein. Now they all contain the same basic structure, but the R group is different for each one. R group क्या होता है? R group is also known as a variable group. What do we call it? We call it a variable group. Variable क्या होता है? Which changes. R group हम कहते हैं variable को. Now for example, a basic structure of all amino acid is इस तरह का होता है वो. I'll draw it over here. This is an amino acid. ये मैं एक amino acid draw कर रहा हूँ. On one side we have an NH2 group. On one side we have a carboxylic group. लेकिन जो ये R group है, this R group is different in all amino acids. For example, this R group can also be CH3. This R group can also be COC. तो ये R group change होता रहता है. Other than this, ये जो पूरा हिस्सा है, this whole part of the amino acid, this is common in all those 20 amino acids, but the R group is different. And this is the variable group. The R group is the one which differs it from each other. This is the one which is differing one amino acid from all the other. This is the R group which differs methionine from glycine, from glutamic acid, from valine. यही है जो different amino acids को आपस में differentiate करता है. So when amino acids are joined together, a protein is formed. हम इसको polypeptide chain भी कहते हैं. When amino acids join together, we'll be doing this in translation part. Translation में क्या होता है? Different amino acids form bonds. When they form bonds, they form a chain on the ribosome. That chain is basically known as a polypeptide chain because वो जो polypeptide है ना, peptide bonds form होते हैं. And when a lot of peptide bonds are formed, we call that a polypeptide. Now the amino acids can be arranged in any order, resulting in hundreds of thousands of different proteins. Even a small difference in the order of the amino acid results in a different protein being formed. For example, आगे एक हम चीज पढ़ेंगे सिकल सेल एनीमिया. सिकल सेल एनीमिया में क्या होता था कि a red blood cell contains glutamic acid as one of its amino acid base sequence. But when that glutamic acid is replaced by another acid known as valine, valine क्या करता है? Valine distorts the shape of the red blood cell and turns it into a sickle cell cell. तो वो एक चेंज ऑफ अमाइनो एसिड्स, क्योंकि रेड ब्लड सेल तो अमाइनो एसिड से बने, वन चेंज ऑफ दैट अमाइनो एसिड डिस्ट्रप्ट्स द होल स्ट्रक्चर ऑफ अ रेड ब्लड सेल एंड रेड ब्लड सेल की शेप कुछ सिकल जैसी हो जाती है, अ मून टाइप शेप. So these amino acids can be arranged in any order, resulting in hundreds of thousands of different proteins. This is the structure of an amino acid. On one side, we have a group जिसको हम कहते हैं amine group. What do we call it? Amine. And on one side we have another group, इसको हम कहते हैं COOH group. कौन सा group है ये? COOH group. On one side of the carbon we have hydrogen, and on one side of the carbon we have the variable group. तो कार्बन के 4 बॉन्ड यहाँ पे बन रहे हैं, 1 2 3 4. एक आपका माइन ग्रुप है, एक हाइड्रोजन, एक कार्बोक्सिलिक ग्रुप, एंड दिस इज द वन व्हिच चेंजेस. ये कभी कभार R की जगह क्या हो सकता है? फॉर एग्जांपल इन प्लेस ऑफ R it can be CH3 as well, it can be CH2 CH5 as well. This is what differentiates each of the proteins. Now how your body uses amino acids as building blocks is a interesting part. All these amino acids join together to form these polypeptide chains, और यही polypeptide chains then further form proteins, and those protein can be either primary, secondary or tertiary. That depends on the arrangement of those peptide chains. Amino acid were just the building blocks. Okay, those building blocks made the peptide chain. Now these peptide chains can arrange themselves accordingly to the structure of the protein or which is required for its particular function. The third group in your biological molecules is lipids. Lipids हम fats को भी कहते हैं. Now most lipids in the body are made up of triglycerides. ट्राइग्लिसराइड्स का क्या मतलब है? ट्राई मीन 3, glycer means glycerol molecule, and ides mean chain. Their basic unit is one glycerol molecule and three fatty acid chain. ये जो triglyceride molecule की बात कर रहे हैं now, one triglyceride is made up of one glycerol and three fatty acid chains. The fatty acids vary in size and structure, and lipids are divided into fats which are solid at room temperature and oils which are liquid at room temperature. अगर जो lipid है, if the lipid is a solid, we call it fat. If the lipid is liquid, we call it oil. तो इसके दो ही फॉर्म्स हो गए. अगर वो सॉलिड्स है, वी डिक्लेयर देम एज फैट्स. इफ दे आर इन द फॉर्म ऑफ लिक्विड्स, तो हम उसको कह देते हैं ऑयल्स हैं. एंड द फैटी एसिड्स कैन वेरी इन साइज एंड स्ट्रक्चर. होता क्या है? दिस इज वन ग्लिसरॉल मॉलिक्यूल. ये तीन साथ क्या लगी होती हैं? फैटी एसिड चेन्स. फॉर एग्जांपल यू कैन सी ये जो पूरा है व्हिच यू कैन सी ओवर हियर, ये जो आपके पास ऑरेंज डॉटेड लाइन के अंदर स्ट्रक्चर है, दिस इज वन ग्लिसरॉल मॉलिक्यूल. इसके अंदर कितने कार्बन आ रहे हैं? C3H5O3. ये आपके पास ग्लिसरॉल मॉलिक्यूल है C3H5O3 which is combining with 1 2 3 fatty acid chain. तो ये बेसिकली क्या हो गया? दिस इज वन ग्लिसरॉल combined with 3 fatty acid chains. तो एक ग्लिसरॉल हो गया and 1 2 3 fatty acid chain. This is the basic structure of a triglyceride molecule. तो अगर आपको कभी ड्रॉ करने के लिए आ सकता है, you can draw its structure as well.